Nostradamus, a 16th-century French astrologer and seer, has long intrigued historians and enthusiasts alike with his enigmatic quatrains in Les Prophéties. This collection of cryptic verses, written in an era of religious and political turbulence, has often been interpreted as forecasting some of humanity's most pivotal events. From wars to revolutions, and even technological advancements. Many believe his work holds a mirror to the course of history, albeit one clouded in metaphor and mystery. One such quatrain reads: From the light of the east, darkness will spread. A firm ruler will stand at the crossroads. A silent war will ignite the flames. A new order will rise from the ashes of unrest. This verse, layered with ambiguity yet brimming with foreboding, has been linked to crises in East Asia. Nostradamus' imagery of light of the East often evokes the prosperous nations of this region, where technological and cultural advancements shine brightly on the global stage. However, the verse also warns of darkness, a stark contrast to the enlightenment associated with these lands. In late 2024, South Korea, a beacon of modernity and resilience, found itself at the heart of a storm. A series of destabilizing events mirrored the prophecy, drawing the world's attention. A convergence of external threats, internal unrest, and unprecedented challenges pushed the nation to a breaking point. The declaration of martial law on December 4, 2024, marked a critical juncture in South Korea's modern history. What began as a proud story of technological innovation and cultural influence was overshadowed by cyber warfare, military tension, and social upheaval. In many ways, the chaos seemed to embody Nostradamus' foretelling, turning a once prosperous nation into a stage for uncertainty and existential questioning. The eerie relevance of Nostradamus' words to these events has reignited debates about the true nature of his prophecies. Are they glimpses of an inevitable future, shaped by universal patterns? Or are they a reflection of humanity's tendency to find meaning in chaos? Regardless, the unfolding crisis in South Korea serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of order and the weight of choices made during times of turmoil. As we delve deeper into the events that followed, the intersections between Nostradamus' prophecy and South Korea's unfolding crisis reveal lessons that resonate far beyond the boundaries of a single nation. This is a story of resilience, choices, and the ever-present tension between freedom and security. On the morning of December 4, 2024, South Korea stood at a historic crossroads. President Junun, in a televised address that gripped the nation, delivered a scathing critique of the National Assembly, accusing it of becoming a den of criminals that had paralyzed the country's administrative and legal systems through the passage of laws he deemed harmful to the fabric of governance. The president's words were filled with intense anger and frustration, as he accused lawmakers of fueling chaos and deliberately undermining the stability and effectiveness of the country's government. In his speech, President Junun painted a stark picture of a country on the brink of collapse, highlighting the National Assembly's role in enabling corruption, which he argued had severely crippled the government's ability to restore order. He pointed to the passage of recent laws that, in his view, had rendered the country's administrative machinery ineffective and had thrown the legal system into disarray. The very foundations of South Korean democracy, he claimed, were under threat from within. President Junun's remarks were not just about criticizing individual laws or members of the assembly, they were an open attack on the entire system of governance. He accused the legislative body of working in tandem with corrupt interests, using the power granted to them by the people to manipulate and distort the system for personal gain. For Junun, the National Assembly had become a breeding ground for dysfunction, where decisions were no longer made for the public good but for the benefit of a select few. The impact of these remarks was immediate. The political climate in South Korea had already been volatile, with widespread protests and growing discontent among the public. But now the confrontation between the executive and the legislature had reached a boiling point. The president's address was a clear escalation in the ongoing battle for control of the nation's future. The tension between the presidency and the National Assembly had been building for months. But now it was on full display for the world to see. President Junan also accused the opposition parties of deliberately pushing these laws with the intention of overthrowing South Korea's democratic system. He argued that the opposition had aligned itself with corrupt elements in the country, working to destabilize the government and sow division within society. He claimed that the political opposition was deliberately exacerbating the country's problems, using legal and political means to undermine the very principles that had built South Korea into the global powerhouse it had become. According to Junan, this was not just a political disagreement, it was an existential battle for the future of the country. In response to the president's harsh words, members of the National Assembly, particularly those from opposition parties, launched a blistering counterattack. They accused Junan of overstepping his authority, accusing him of taking an authoritarian approach and undermining the very democratic system he had sworn to protect. The National Assembly leaders claimed that his speech was an attempt to divert attention from his administration's failures and to deflect blame onto the legislative body. They argued that Junan's leadership had only further polarized the nation and weakened its institutions. The situation quickly escalated from a political dispute to a full-blown constitutional crisis. The opposition, emboldened by their criticism of the president, began calling for his resignation, demanding that he step down for the good of the country. Several lawmakers even went so far as to call for legal action against President Junan, accusing him of inflammatory rhetoric and inciting division. They pointed to his increasing authoritarian measures, including the crackdown on dissent, the control of media narratives, and the erosion of civil liberties, as evidence of his growing disregard for the rule of law. As tensions continued to rise, the demands for Junan's resignation became more forceful. The National Assembly, which had already been a battleground of political infighting, became the center of a fierce struggle for the soul of South Korean democracy. The assembly was now divided not only along party lines but also along ideological lines. The question of whether the president would be allowed to remain in office became a matter of national importance. As both sides dug in their heels, unwilling to give an inch. Against this backdrop of political turmoil, President Junan's decision to declare martial law was seen as the culmination of a long-running battle between the executive and the legislature. On December 4, 2024, the president formally announced that the military would take control of key urban centers, including Seoul, the capital, and Busan, the second-largest city. This move, unprecedented in South Korean history, sent shockwaves through the country and the international community. It was a stark indication of just how far the situation had deteriorated. In his address, Junan justified the imposition of martial law as a necessary response to the growing internal threats facing South Korea. He cited the increasing instability, both from external pressures and internal divisions, as the driving forces behind his decision. Junan argued that the country's sovereignty was under threat from a combination of hostile foreign actions, cyber attacks, and the political chaos within the National Assembly itself. The president's declaration of martial law was, in his view, the only way to restore order and protect the country from further disintegration. The National Assembly, however, rejected Junan's justification for martial law, accusing him of seizing dictatorial power and undermining the very democratic principles that South Korea was built upon. Opposition leaders argued that the president's decision was a gross overreach and a direct assault on the freedoms of the South Korean people. They warned that martial law would only escalate the political crisis and deepen the country's divisions. As the political battle raged on, the South Korean public found itself caught in the crossfire. Protesters filled the streets, demanding an end to the authoritarian measures imposed by Junhan. Meanwhile, supporters of the president rallied behind him, believing that his decisive actions were necessary to safeguard the nation's future. The situation had become a bitter struggle for the country's soul, with no easy resolution in sight. The declaration of martial law was not just a response to external threats or a means of dealing with internal disorder, it was a reflection of the deepening power struggle between the president and the National Assembly. Both sides had accused each other of undermining the nation's democratic institutions, and the rhetoric had become increasingly vitriolic. What had begun as a dispute over legislation had now escalated into a full-blown constitutional crisis, with South Korea's future hanging in the balance. As President Junhan's martial law began to take effect, the political landscape in South Korea was forever altered. The divide between the executive and the legislature was now more pronounced than ever, and the path forward seemed unclear. The future of South Korea would depend on the ability of its leaders to find a way to bridge the divide and restore unity to a fractured nation. For now, the country stood at a precipice, unsure of what the future would hold. The only certainty was that the events of December 4, 2024, would forever shape the course of South Korean history. As we reflect on the events of December 4, 2024, the martial law declaration serves as a stark reminder of the delicate balance between order and chaos, freedom and control. Just as Nostradamus' prophecy hinted at a new order rising from the ashes of unrest, South Korea stood at a crossroads, its future uncertain, its people divided, and its leaders challenged to navigate the turbulent waters of modern geopolitics. The events of December 4, 2024, marked a turning point in South Korea's political landscape, with consequences that extended beyond the immediate crisis, affecting governance, rule of law, and the country's social fabric. President Junhan's televised address, in which he criticized the National Assembly as a den of criminals and accused it of paralyzing the nation's administrative and legal systems, set the stage for a national emergency. The declaration of martial law followed, triggering a power struggle between the executive and legislative branches. This situation raised fundamental questions about democracy, governance, and the delicate balance between order and freedom, political consequences and crisis of legitimacy. The direct political fallout from President Junhan's address was immediate and severe. His blunt criticisms of the National Assembly and accusations of corruption, while resonating with some segments of the population frustrated with the legislative gridlock, led to a backlash from the opposition and many other lawmakers. The president's attack on the National Assembly escalated the political crisis rather than resolving it, creating a wider rift between the executive and legislative branches. The opposition parties reacted fiercely, calling for Junhan's resignation and demanding legal action against him for his inflammatory remarks. Several lawmakers went further, advocating for the president's arrest, accusing him of violating constitutional norms. As the president's actions and words fueled division, the country found itself facing an unprecedented situation, with the legitimacy of both the executive and legislative branches under threat. Impact on governance and rule of law. President Junhan's decision to declare martial law was framed as a necessary response to internal disorder and corruption. But it also raised significant concerns about the future of South Korea's democratic system. By bypassing the legislative process and taking control of key institutions, Junhan undermined the separation of powers that forms the foundation of South Korea's democracy. The martial law, intended to restore order, instead deepened the crisis. weakening the trust in the institutions of governance. The accusations that the National Assembly had passed laws which paralyzed the country's administrative and legal systems only served to expose the dysfunction within South Korean politics. Junon claimed that the legislative gridlock and the laws passed by the Assembly had led to an ineffective government and a legal system in disarray. However, by declaring martial law, the president himself moved beyond the constitutional limits, suggesting a desire for greater control over the country's political and administrative affairs. This created a situation where the rule of law, instead of being strengthened, was further eroded. Economic and social fallout. Beyond politics, the crisis in South Korea also had significant economic and social ramifications. The unrest prompted by the martial law declaration disrupted normal life, and the country's economic outlook became increasingly uncertain. Foreign investors, spooked by the instability and concerns over the potential erosion of democratic norms, began pulling back from South Korean markets. The fear of prolonged unrest and authoritarian rule damaged South Korea's reputation as a stable and reliable partner in international trade. Domestically, the economic situation worsened. As the focus shifted away from tackling issues such as inflation and unemployment to managing the political crisis, South Koreans, particularly younger generations who had grown accustomed to the country's democratic institutions, voiced deep concern about the authoritarian path the government seemed to be heading toward. Public protests intensified, as citizens demanded both political accountability and the protection of their freedoms. Connection to Nostradamus prophecy. Nostradamus prophecy, which spoke of a new order rising from the ashes of unrest, appears to have eerie relevance in the current South Korean situation. The country's political unrest, marked by the growing tensions between the president and the National Assembly, could lead to the emergence of a new order as the prophecy suggests. However, this new order could take many forms, either a return to a more stable and functioning democracy, or an authoritarian regime that imposes order through force. The prophecy implies that societal collapse and unrest could lead to a transformation in the structure of governance, with the ashes of the old order paving the way for a new system. South Korea stands at this crossroads. The future of its democracy and governance hangs in the balance, dependent on whether the political factions can resolve their differences or whether the president's heavy-handed approach will ultimately transform the nation's political landscape into something more authoritarian. Long-term implications. The long-term consequences of these events are far from clear. If President Junon's martial law is seen as a temporary measure to restore stability, South Korea may eventually return to a democratic order, although the damage done to democratic institutions could take years to repair. On the other hand, if the president's actions lead to the erosion of democratic norms and the centralization of power, South Korea could enter a prolonged period of authoritarian rule, with significant consequences for both domestic politics and international relations. In either case, the events of December 4, 2024, will shape South Korea's future for years to come. The question remains whether the country will restore its democratic institutions or whether it will succumb to the allure of strongman rule in the name of stability. The international community will be closely watching the unfolding developments, as the outcome will have broader implications for global democracy and the balance of power in East Asia. In conclusion, the political crisis in South Korea, ignited by President Junon's controversial statements and subsequent martial law declaration, has triggered a profound transformation in the country's governance and society. Whether this will lead to a more authoritarian regime or a renewed democratic order remains uncertain. But the stakes are high. Nostradamus' prophecy of a new order rising from the ashes of unrest seems to reflect the situation South Korea finds itself in today, at a crossroads where its future political system could either be strengthened or undermined. What is certain, however, is that the outcome of this crisis will not only determine the future of South Korea but also have a lasting impact on the global political landscape. If you found this analysis insightful and engaging, don't forget to like and subscribe to stay updated with more in-depth discussions and updates. Your support means a lot. And by subscribing, you'll ensure that you never miss out on the latest content. Thank you for watching.